Okay, so I'm going to be showing you how to make this beat complete with EQ, reverb, buses that send to reverb and send to something called parallel compression to give it some dirtiness. That's this right here. Here's the reverb bus. I'm going to be showing you some EQing techniques and considerations. And I'm going to be showing you how to do some basic mastering, okay? Or at least some basic master limiting. And remember to pick up the computer music, just pick up an issue of Computer Music Magazine so you can get useful VST plugins like this barricade limiter, which I do absolutely love and I use on every single one of my songs. All right, I am right-clicking in this gray part here, and I am choosing Insert Virtual Instrument on New Track. And any VSTs I have installed that are virtual instruments, meaning synths, samplers, drum machines, that kind of thing, those should all show up right here. And a virtual instrument, I guess the best definition would just be anything that you can trigger with MIDI, whether the MIDI is all internal, like using an internal step sequencer like we'll be doing in a minute, or the MIDI is all, coming in from a keyboard controller or something like that into your computer. All right, anyways, I am looking for Cult Drums, KVLT, ridiculous. I think I got this for like $6 on sale at some point. They have a Cult Drums 2 now that is way more full-featured. It's got some actually nice sounding drums on it, and it's really not that expensive for what you get. I haven't bothered, but I really probably should. But I like this Cult Drums a lot. I've actually been able to push these, and you'll be surprised when I say that when you hear these in a minute because they sound very flat by default. But I've been able to push these into some really cool kind of extreme Amon Tobin or drum and bass kind of territories. So anyways, this is Cult Drums, and this is a virtual drum kit. We can trigger this with MIDI, which we'll be doing in a second. Oh, I'm sorry, I glazed over something. When I first open this up, and you'll see this on a lot of virtual instruments, especially drum machines, it'll ask you, do you want to just make one stereo track or do you want to make multiple stereo tracks? By default, I would say you always, if you're being serious about actually trying to make some music you're going to do something with later, you want to tell it to put it all out into separate tracks like this one has, right? We got a track for bass, or a kick drum, track for snare, tracks for toms, and tracks for cymbals. And you want to do that because you want to have a lot more flexibility later in terms of not only mixing, right? I want to be able to EQ the bass drum and compress the bass drum differently than the snare, but also it makes it a heck of a lot easier when you've maybe started to arrange your drum loops, that kind of thing. It's so easy to just like take the kick drum out for a minute, or take the snare out for a minute, or take the cymbals out for a minute, and create a breakdown, or slowly start to build your beat up just by introducing one element at a time. So I can show you a little bit of that in the next video. Anyways, we got Cult Drums, and in Reaper we have two different views. Of course, this is pretty much how every DAW works. I can open up the mixer view by pressing Control M for mixer, and here are all my channels. You're familiar enough with DAWs, I'm sure, that this should look relatively familiar to you. This is our master channel, and this is the channel with Cult Drums on it, and then Cult Drums is routing the audio from all those sources to these channels. So, first thing I'm gonna do, I can select all these channels here, and I can give them a color, track color, and I can set them to random colors. And I can also give them track icons if I really want to. And trust me, taking just a minute to do this stuff, you will have songs that have 30 plus tracks on them. And when it's a project that you've been working on for 10 plus hours, eventually you get used to the fact that kick drum is that kind of orange kind of color. It just makes it a lot easier to find the tracks that you want to be working with. So here's the main Cult Drums track. And anytime you see this with virtual instruments, you want to feed MIDI to this track, okay? So I'm going to feed some MIDI to that track. Reaper comes with a very cool step sequencer called MIDI sequencer Megababy. It's a bit ugly, and it's also a bit intimidating at first, but trust me, this is the most powerful step sequencer. It maybe doesn't have every feature on earth, but it's got more in one package than any other step sequencer I've ever seen. So it's pretty awesome. So let's see. What is kick and snare here? Oh good, we're not hearing this. That's right, I gotta set something up for OBS. It's already set up, now I'm in trouble. Oh, these are in the wrong order. So I've got cult drums, and then underneath that I've got my MIDI. I need to put them in the right order so that the MIDI is first and it gets fed into the instrument. So here we go. There we go.
Hey, it's Clark from the future. I realize you can't hear the beat. I turn it up in a minute.
All right, we got our beats per minute down here. Let's do something fast. There we go. Anywhere in this, if I right click, I can audition the sample that is on that track or assigned to that MIDI note, right? So C1 is the kick, C sharp is the stick. We got a snare there, a slightly less ringy snare above it. Oh, we got a third snare too. Bit more of a piccolo. And another one after that. Here's my hi-hat. Ah! Alright, so we've got a hi-hat slider here. I can also pan it. There we go. Alright, but as you notice, let me go ahead and mute the cymbals for a second. As you notice, the kick drum and the snare drum are probably pretty flat sounding. So let me go ahead and start to add some EQ and some compression to that.
Hey, this is Clark from the future again. I realized that I did not say the name of the plugin I was adding. This is called ReEQ, R-E-A-E-Q. It comes for free with Reaper, and it's a good EQ.
For most uses. So for the kick, for instance, let's see, what do we want to do with it? Maybe we want to put a bump somewhere around here to make it a little more aggressive. 1500. That's a big bump, but whatever. That's what I'm doing. And let's see. Let's do the same thing on the snare. EQ. You know what I'm going to do for the snare? This is a high shelf. And it'll bring up everything up there. And meanwhile, on the snare, I actually want to get rid of probably anything below about 100 hertz because I just don't need it. And that's a mixing technique that you're going to want to keep in mind pretty damn often. With the cymbals, for instance, bringing those back in. Let me turn these down a little bit again. With the cymbals, for instance, we don't need anything down here in terms of musical information for the cymbals. In fact, it sounds like without these starting to get tinny, with them continuing to be pretty full sounding, we can take everything out south of, say, 700 hertz without missing it at all. There's with it not enabled, and there's with it with the EQ enabled. And the whole point of doing this is that we want to get those bass frequencies that we can't even hear, don't even really notice, out of here. We want to get them out of our mix so we won't have them interfering with our kick drum or a bass drum or our guitars, anything that's supposed to be occupying all these bass frequencies down at the bottom. So, you know, our cymbals really only matter up here, so we can really be pretty aggressive about cutting off everything underneath, say, even 1,000 hertz without having to worry about it. Or 1 kilohertz, as people say. All right. So anyways, that's EQing. So I've started to get a mix going. I would probably change the balance of this a bit. We've got these peaking at about 18. We could maybe turn these up till they're peaking at about 12. And this number right here is our number that shows us what our peak volume actually is. And if you click on it, it'll reset so you can check it again. It's starting to sound pretty good. I can also, with this snare, you know, we've got that ring in the snare. I can find that ring pretty quickly, hopefully, and get it out of here as well. To do that, I want to change this slider. This slider is called bandwidth on here. Sometimes it's called Q, as in the letter Q. And making that really narrow allows us to be very accurate here. And find, there's my solo button, so I've soloed it, and find just the frequency we don't want. There's a low ring down here. And there's some of the harmonies of it right here. Let's see, what happens when we cut this? Yeah. That's certainly a little bit tighter. I would also probably, let's go ahead and make another one of these. And find that lower ring. Maybe right about there. Now if we take out too much of this one, this is where the main punch of this snare is. So if we take out too much of it, the snare kind of loses its impact. But that's okay because we can always make up for that by turning the snare up. Now we've got the space to kind of turn this snare back up. And now we're accentuating more of the snare than just that main ringiness. So again, EQ off, EQ on. We've definitely made it a lot better. I would probably play around with the kick in a similar way maybe. I could even sort of intentionally boost some of the low frequencies, right around say 70, 60. And try to get those coming through a little bit more. And again, we want our bandwidth not to be too big because we just want this to be a little bump where it counts. And a lot of times with kick, if you want to get rid of the sort of cardboard box sound, that's usually found around somewhere between 200 and 300, usually about 250 are the frequencies that make something sound boxy. Although it sounds like in this instance, it's more around 150. So we could get rid of some of that. But again, you're losing your impact when you do too much of that and you have to compensate for it. Oh, the last thing I want to point out, I sort of violated my rule a little bit in this one. But typically, the key to doing good sounding EQ, especially if you're working with actual live sound, the key is to always cut first and boost second. Okay, so like with this kick, for instance, I'm boosting a ton, right? With this snare, I'm boosting a lot, but I definitely am cutting with more bands that I'm boosting. So typically, just remember that with reverb. That was a huge mistake I made a lot back in the early days, is I would boost, and then on all my tracks I'd have EQs where I'm boosting frequencies, and it's just continuing to be muddy. And that's because I hadn't done step one first, and step one is cut the crap out that you don't need. That's the important part. The more you can cut the crap out of every track that you don't need, the more room to breathe everything will have. And then if you do choose to do little boosts here and there, it'll be a lot easier for that stuff to accentuate your sound instead of everything fighting each other in your mix. Okay, just keep that in mind. Cut first, boost second. All right, let me show you a bit more about Megababy. So I've got a pattern that I like. I want to switch this pattern up, you know, every second time it plays, or even every fourth time it plays, add in maybe some little flourish on the toms or something. That's pretty easy to do in Megababy. So I've got this sequence length up here. If I turn this up, it just adds a bunch more blank space. I don't want that. So what I do instead is I hold down Shift or Control. I always forget which. I think it's Shift. Yep, Shift. I hold down Shift and I click on the note names over here on the side, and it's doubled my sequence. Okay, so maybe do something like that. I could do like a little roll here. I could even double this again. This will go up to 128 steps. You definitely want to have this widescreen when you're working like this. Cool. All right, next thing I want to show you is buses. Buses are very, very important. this kind of separates the kids from the adults when it comes to doing any kind of music production in general. People who understand buses and use them, and people who don't. So I'm going to show you kind of some of the power of buses here. Let me go ahead and save this though, because I actually like this more than I thought I would. What's cool about Reaper is going to create a subdirectory for the project. And typically, if you've already recorded stuff into Reaper, you want to also tell it to move all the media you've created into the project directory. We haven't actually created any media, but I can still keep that checked because it doesn't matter. I hit save, and there we go. It will have automatically moved everything into the project folder for me. All right, I was going to show you buses. So let's go ahead and add. We're just going to add a new track. The shortcut for that is Control-T. And when you add a new track by default, it adds it after whatever track you have selected. So it should add it at the end of this. Let's see. And it does. Okay. This is a totally blank track. We want to add, you know, give it a name like Cult Bus or Drum Bus or something like that, so we know what the hell it is. And if we want, we can move that kind of up to the top. I sort of have my buses at the top by default because this is where all my mixing happens when I'm done with all the arrangement and stuff of my track. I'm putting my finishing touches on either the buses here or the master track. So I just keep them all up at the top here. Anyways, what you do with a bus is you can send everything. You can send as many tracks as you want, the audio from those tracks, to the bus. And you can use that bus to add effects to those tracks, or to just keep those tracks organized, so to make your life a little bit easier. So for instance, I can have the Cult Bus. So here's my routing buttons down here. I can select multiple tracks like this. I'm just clicking one, holding down Shift, clicking another, and it selects everything in between. And if I right click on this routing button, I can uncheck master send, meaning these will now totally be silent until I right click again and send them instead to the Cult Bus. And what's cool about that is now I've got a bus where I can turn my, say, oh man, I love everything, but I wish all my drums were a little bit louder. Instead of going and messing with all these things, I've already got my mix for my drums the way I like it to sound. I could just bump this up a little bit, or I could take my synth or bass or guitar buses and turn those down. And it makes it a lot easier than going across 30 different tracks and turning it all down. So that's what I got going here. So now all my sounds go into this bus before it goes to the mastering chain. That also lets us do things like throw a compressor on this bus or whatever we want to, throw one final EQ on this bus to excite the drums a little bit more, make them a little bit brighter or whatever. So there's a lot we can do with that. You can also use buses for effects. So let's actually duplicate this track. So now we've got it coming through two buses. And so it's twice as loud right now. And let's change the name to Cult Effects Bus. And if I start to throw some effects on here, we can get all sorts of other sounds going. Let's do a Waveshaper. I really like this for quick and dirty kind of clipping distortion. Waveshaping distortion. So I'm going to call this Waveshaper. Why not? All right, and here's what waveshaping does. And this will be nasty at first, but let me just solo this. Whoop, where'd it go? Here's my Waveshaper. So as I turn this up, we start to get something really nice and aggressive sounding. At the very top, it's straight up distorted, right? Whoa, that was too much. Sorry if that hurt your ears. Let me turn this guy down. Right, we get something real nasty. But just below that, we're getting something that's a little dirty, a little aggressive, really awesome sounding. Again, here's our nice clean one. Let me turn this down, start to bring this back in. This is a form of parallel compression, also called New York compression, or New York City compression, I always forget which. But basically we've got one track giving us a nice squashed, dirty compression that's making everything a little bit livelier sounding. And then we've still got our unaffected signal going through our main bus. So This one's turned down really low. In fact, I could turn down even lower than this. There's it off. There's it on. So it's not completely, it's not making the signal sound trashy or dirty, but it's giving it just a little bit more sizzle, a little bit more liveliness. We can also go ahead and do a reverb on this guy. So again, I'm going to take this main bus and duplicate it. I'm right clicking and choosing duplicate. And let's do Cult Verb. And I love the Valhalla line of reverbs. They put out a few free things, but they're really echoes and flangers. They're cool as heck, especially Space Modulator I love. People fell in love with Supermassive over the last couple months. That just came out during quarantine, and everybody was all about it. Frequency Echo is also quite cool, and I've used that for a lot of things. But anyways, Vintage Verb's the only one I've actually spent money on. The good and bad thing is they're always $50. So you buy a really nice flexible reverb, but it comes with a lot of really awesome presets too. Anyways, let's add a reverb. So by default, you definitely want 9 times out of 10, your mix on your reverb bus to be 100%. You only want reverb coming through on this bus. Way too loud, right? It's way too loud. So let's turn that guy down. And it's very dark, and it's a very long reverb. I don't need this to sound like it's in some enormous cave. I want this to be kind of a lively sort of room sound, make it sound like it's in a real space. So a few pointers for that, and you don't have to get Valhalla Vintage Verb. These are pointers that will work for pretty much any reverb. You want to turn your decay down to something pretty short, somewhere usually between, say, 0.2 and 0.4 seconds, maybe 0.5. So let's turn it down to about that. We want to turn the size of our room down quite a bit. If your reverb has something like size, typically they do, or some kind of word that means about the same thing. There we go. I'm already getting something that sounds more like a real space. And I typically don't want my reverb to be this dark, because if we look at it through Re-EQ, and there's better frequency analyzers I could use, but let's just look at it through Re-EQ. Look how much bottom end this reverb channel has. I don't want all that. That's just going to end up interfering with my kick drum and my bass cutting through. And I realize you barely got a chance to look at that, so let me show you again. Look at this. Look at all this junk. I don't want any of that. So one thing I can do, and most reverbs have this, but if they don't, just use an EQ to cut it out. Let's use a low cut here. And let's get rid of a bunch of that. And if you look, some of it is still there, so I can more forcefully get rid of it with an EQ like this. Because yeah, I don't need that in my reverb. Sometimes I do, you know, if I want a really big, lush reverb on, say, a single singer or a piano, something like that, where it's a one instrument that you want to sound as booming as possible, you know? But typically, it's just muddying up your mix. It's adding a bunch of crap in the bottom end that you don't want. So anyways, reverb off, reverb on. It's just adding a bit. It's adding a bit to it. There's our plain drums. There's our cool drums. We could also, if we want this reverb to be a little bit liver and a little bit nastier sounding, we could try, and this is one thing that's cool about Reaper. You can't always do this with other DAWs. In Reaper, you can route anything to anything else. So I can take this Waveshaper bus, and also Reaper's totally agnostic about what you decide is a bus, right? This is just a regular track, but I'm treating it like a bus, and so that's what it is, because I'm sending audio signals to it. That's what makes it a bus. There are a lot of DAWs out there where you have to tell it, this is a send or this is a bus, you know, or you can only use the 3 sends or 4 buses that they give you. Reaper's not like that at all. It's so much more flexible. I'm gonna route this send to my reverb. And so now I've got my Waveshaper, the nastiness, going to my reverb as well. It might be too much. Let's see. It definitely added something to it. It made it a little liver. I like that. I like that. I'm going to keep it. If I wanted to back that off, you know, if I was like, man, that sounds great going to the reverb, but it's just a little bit too much, that's pretty easy to do. What you do, instead of right-clicking on route, you click on it, and the full routing window comes up, and now you've got all sorts of volume knobs or sliders. You've got all sorts of pitch sliders and other routing options, right? But all we care about right now are the sliders. So I can turn this down a bit if I want. So it's not quite as aggressive going into the reverb. And it just adds a bit of color. And so let me show you that again. Here's actually, I never use this, but here we go. So it's now the Waveshaper, the nastiness is totally out of the reverb, and I can slowly turn it up until I like it. You know, somewhere around there is good. So just keep that in mind. With routing, you've always got options. And I do this a lot, especially with electronic music. I'll decide that I don't want a kick drum, or I don't want drums coming into the reverb at all, or like bass or something like that, because especially in those low frequencies, I find I just want to keep them sort of clean and crystal clear. So I can go ahead and turn that off, right? I can mute it just to see if I like the bass drum to be muted in the reverb or not. Oh, I still hear it from the Waveshaper. So, but there it is without the kick drum. Or just like we did a second ago in the Waveshaper, I can say, all right, I want the bass drum in there, but I want less of it. Okay. So that's routing. I recommend you do invest in a good reverb. Valhalla is the one that most people that I like and respect kind of swear by, but it just all depends on who you talk to. Last thing I want to show you is adding a master limiter. So if you buy an issue of Computer Music Magazine, it will come with a limiter called Barricade. And I have done A/B testing between Barricade and Waves L2 limiter, which, you know, for a very long time was the industry standard. And I like Barricade a little bit better for mastering limiters. So what a mastering limiter does, I won't get too deep into it, but it has an adaptive release time. So, you know, you can look into that a little bit more, but it basically means that it will try to avoid unnecessarily squashing your signal as much as possible, and it will be able to turn your signal up while being as transparent as possible. So the goal here is to have it turn up while still sounding nice and natural, and with you not even really noticing the limiting or the compression, where the Waveshape and Distortion was the exact opposite. We wanted it to compress things, but we also wanted it to make it a little bit dirty, almost like putting it through a bit of an overdrive or a distortion. So I typically, as I'm working on a song, once I start to get something going, I typically throw Barricade on the master channel here, which is what I've done. It's got presets on here. One of them is DVD master, and we could choose that and maybe turn the input gain up a little. And immediately start to get something that's louder, more aggressive, something that is closer to what you will really have as your finished product, okay? And so with that in mind, and this input gain is turned way too far up right now, by the way. It all depends on the song, but I'm typically at somewhere between +6 and +9 for the input gain. And this also does two things in it that sort of add detail to the mix. It's a bit of digital wizardry, but there's a dithering filter, and there's an additional noise shaping filter that comes in as well. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about them. And for one thing, I would show my ignorance a bit if I tried to talk too much about them. But all right, we got some kind of, you know, mastering limiter going on the master channel. And what that means is if I get a mix I think is sounding really, really good, and it's not hitting this too hard, right? Typically you don't want to see this dipping down below, say 6 to 9 dB. Let me turn the master down so I can play this while I talk. So right now, if we look at this again, our drums are barely touching this master, this limiter. Everything's certainly louder right now, but it's not causing the limiter to really engage. But you can push this thing as hard as -6 to -9, -10 even, without it starting to sound nasty. Anything past that though, and you typically will start to get what they call the brick wall effect. It's got other names like a sausage master. People made fun of or criticized Metallica a lot for it on their Death Magnetic album, that their master was just way too crushing, and none of the dynamics that you want, the loud parts and the quiet parts in the song, were there anymore because they just crushed it to death. We want to avoid that. And so as of right now, I like the fact that, you know, we're barely engaging this limiter at all. It's just like licking at the top of it, right? So as we continue to create our mix, we start to build a bass line and stuff around this. You know, we can check back in on this from time to time and see how hard are we hitting these meters right here, right? Are we still kind of in a reasonable spot? Does it still sound good to our ears? Or is it starting to sound nasty to our ears and we come in here and yep, we're hitting -12 pretty regularly, right? And then we can adjust really easily like this. And guess what? If you make a mix you really love, you got a mastering limiter on this thing already, you can export this thing and send it right into SoundCloud, a bada bing, a bada boom, right? Without having to worry about getting somebody else to master it or anything like that, typically. Now, you'll want to do that for actual commercial releases, but just for, you know, creating a demo or something like that, you're ready to go. You're ready to publish this stuff, as long as it sounds good when it goes past Barricade, okay? Speaking of which, you typically don't want to put anything after your mastering limiter. And so if you had a master EQ on this where you're making one final tweak to things, maybe you decided, oh, there's just a little bit too much going on at around 300. Let me scoop that out a bit to give myself a little bit more clarity in my mix. You want to make sure that's before your mastering limiter. This needs to be the last thing that's in your chain. Because if you put stuff after this, it could end up boosting your signal and creating distortion. So you always want your mastering limiter to be the last thing. So let's review. This has been a very, very, very long video, but I showed you how to add a virtual instrument as you start to install some VST virtual drum machines and synthesizers. I showed you how to add that. I showed you how to add EQ or other effects. And again, we've pretty much only worked in this window, the mixing window, right now. But in the next video, I can show you a bit about starting to arrange a song. We looked at adding EQ. We looked at, you know, doing things like scooping out unnecessary frequencies that you don't need anymore. We looked at adding a bus, right, with compression and a bus with reverb to sweeten up our sound a little bit. And we looked at adding a mastering limiter and a mastering EQ to our mix as well. Okay, so we've learned a hell of a lot. I hope this has been useful to you, and I hope this gets you sort of on the right foot to starting to make good sounding music, good sounding projects. Anyways, this video is way too long. Let's call this one done for now.